you listen to enough of this podcast, you might be concerned that we're approaching a major collapse of governments, financial markets, or even the Western developed world in its entirety. So when the revolution comes, do you want to be out of shape and unable to defend yourself, or do you want to be fighting fit? Why not try Fight Camp? Fight Camp is interactive at-home boxing. They bring the best workout in the world into your home and make it fun. Explore thousands of workouts led by expert trainers with decades of experience teaching proper boxing form and technique. Fight Camp has live punch counting stats that motivate you by counting every punch throughout your workout and pushing you to meet goals every single round. As you progress, you'll unlock achievements and can go head to head against other members, whether they're across the country or across your living room. One of the best things about Fight Camp is that it makes boxing accessible to everyone. No matter what fitness level you're at, what your age is, or what your experience with boxing is, you can do it. And you're going to have a great time as well. So join the biggest boxing community in the world without ever leaving your home. Fight Camp packages start at just $99. They even offer some great financing options, so you can get started for just $9 a month. To get everything you need, go to fightcamp.com/chatter to learn more. That's fightcamp.com/chatter. CHATTER. Hello everyone. Welcome to another episode of Chatter. Today I am delighted to be joined by Dr. John A. King and Melissa King. John is an author, poet, longtime activist, and the founder of Give Them a Voice Foundation in Texas. John, welcome to the show. Melissa as well.
Hey, g'day mate, how are you?
Yeah, I'm very good. Can't complain too much. I mean, the country's just about holding together, so we
We can solve all the world problems today, mate.
Well, that's a good start. Hopefully the right people are listening.
Yeah, there you go.
So I first came across your work after I'd seen like a little clip of you on Twitter actually talking about PTSD. And then you were kind enough to link some of your other stuff, which I was blown away by. And as I mentioned, like there's a friend of mine that I know who has is recovered from PTSD. I don't know if you could say cured. I don't actually know the terminology. Maybe you can enlighten me. But like for people who don't quite like know what exactly PTSD is, and probably for me as well, to get like the best grasp on exactly what it is, like how would you go about describing it to someone?
Well, PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder. So post-traumatic stress is the stress that happens after a traumatic event. So that's PTS, and we all experience PTS. You have a car accident, you stub your toe, you break your arm, you fall off your skateboard, whatever it is, and there's a trauma that happens, a stress that happens post-stress. And normally it's gone in about 6 weeks. Now, PTSD or disorder is something that continues after 6 months. And when there's recall of events, there's intrusive thoughts, intrusive memories, an inability to be able to reconcile things emotionally. And then there's a third one in the same bucket, complex post-traumatic stress disorder. And complex post-traumatic stress is more tied into childhood sexual abuse, being kidnapped, detained for a wrongly for a long period of time. So they're really the three things that sort of fall in this little bucket.
Like what's the most common trigger then for PTSD? Is it like military conflict, or is it as you were saying the child sexual trauma?
It's not. So one of the misconceptions about PTSD is it's a military thing. It's not. It's anything. Anyone can have PTSD. It's not a sign of weakness. It's a result of a traumatic event. If someone was raped, burgled in their house, assaulted, a major car accident, a house fire. I've got a doctor friend who had a house fire when he was a young child, was trapped in his bedroom, and has major challenges still dealing with it. So
the root of it really is a physiological change in the body. So it's a physiological change that happened in the brain as the result of a trauma. And that trauma can be any, war-related or not. It can be any type of trauma.
So, like, how prevalent is PTSD? Like, what percentage of the population are you looking at that has it then?
It's about 6% will experience PTSD at some form in their life. Now, a lot of people will experience trauma, but not everyone is going to have a response to trauma that lasts more than 6 months. an uncontrolled response to trauma. And I think that's part of it. Unfortunately, we've got a society at the moment which loves to label themselves as a victim of something, and that's one of the things that's really annoying. I heard a Hollywood actress talk about how she had PTSD because a dog sitter was late to mind a dog while she went off to have her nails done. It's like, are you serious? And you need a smack in the mouth or something. It's just ridiculous. There's this minimizing of the thing. PTSD is not something you want. It's not something you want to identify with. And it's certainly something you don't want to, belittle or misuse. It's a major mental issue, which has major ramifications. And as I said, life is traumatic, but being a victim is a matter of choice. We either allow our life to define us or refine us. And I think when it comes to things like PTSD, a lot of it goes undiagnosed because people don't want to talk about it or can't feel they can talk about it. And they don't know how to get their head around it because it's got these series of misconceptions about it. But, anyone who has been in a traumatic situation can get PTSD.
So then, what percentage is going undiagnosed, do you think?
Oh, I don't know, mate. That's very hard to identify because if 6% of population are getting in the USA, that's 12 million cases people will have on an annual basis. And some people will get, as I said, a traffic accident or something. They'll have post-traumatic stress for a period of time, and then they'll move on and develop coping mechanisms for whatever they're doing. So I don't know how much is there's a range of figures for it, but a lot of that is part of that is grant funding padding, and part of it is people not being aware of what's really going on in their lives. It's really difficult. I've been making stuff up like the rest of them.
I think too, a lot of times you have it along with something else. So if someone is already abusing substances, for example, they may put themselves in a situation where they are going to experience trauma, like being trafficked or something that sits alongside it. And so I think because they already had one diagnosis of being addicted to drugs, then the PTSD would go undiagnosed because
and even the other way, like they could end up having trauma and end up abusing drugs, because one of the signs of PTSD is extreme risky behavior, and they end up abusing drugs and they never get to unpack what happened here. And we do a lot of work with veterans, and a lot of our tier 1 veterans, a lot of them, over 50% of them, I'd say, have had extreme childhood abuse, physical or sexual. And they go off and they enroll in the military because no one's ever going to hurt them or theirs again. And they have end up with a diagnosis for military PTSD, but the root of it is actually childhood trauma. And the challenge is that you can't treat this fruit without identifying this tree. And they can't admit to having a childhood issue because that's a pre-existing condition. And in America, that means you lose all your benefits as a veteran. Wow. And it's the same with police. So there's these masses of people out there with root issues that aren't being treated because they can't have conversations with people about it.
Wow. So like so say they got diagnosed with PTSD after coming back from a tour in like Afghanistan or Iraq or somewhere like that, and then they came back and they went to get like therapy or some sort of treatment for PTSD, right? And then it was discovered, I don't know how you'd even use, like it uncovered in therapy that this is something deeper that was like not because of the military. And as a result of that, they would lose coverage and not be able to get the treatment.
They'd lose all their medical benefits. They'd lose their pension. They'd lose everything.
Holy shit.
And you think of it like in Ireland, 60% of the Gardaí there have PTSD. So it's a conversation Europe's more prepared to have than we're prepared to have in America. Britain and Europe, particularly Ireland, is a lot further down the track in having grown up conversations about mental health than the American facade around these areas. It's just, it's absolutely, it's really odd to us.
Because we run a nonprofit, we help people regardless of the root of their trauma. And we, so they, a lot of times will feel more free talking to John in recovery coaching than they would, if they're seeing a therapist or anything.
And we would say, go to the VA and you can get this, you can get treatment for these things. You just, no, we can't tell the VA about it. Therefore, they don't have access to the medications or the therapies or the support groups. And if they go to their PTSD group based around military stuff, they can't bring up any of the other. So it's a dishonest therapeutic approach, which just isn't going to work. Just doesn't work.
Yeah, that's awful. That's
yeah,
really,
it is.
That's really, I had no idea. Like, because I kind of understood the situation with pre-existing conditions, but I didn't realize it was like even that like your trauma could be discounted because it didn't happen at the right time, almost.
Yeah, and if you think about it, childhood trauma in men is not something we're prepared to discuss. We have a culture where we can talk about childhood trauma amongst women. You consider the dining room table and someone say, I was abused or this happened to me, and they go, well, they're good, let's talk about that. But if a guy says, I was raped by my mother, it's the end of the dinner conversation and everyone thinks you're a freak. And that's been my story and my experience. And especially when 45% of perpetrators are female and at least 50% of people who are abused are male. And if we're talking trafficking in some areas of the world, as high as 75 and 80% of trafficking victims are male. So you can't have these conversations because if the statistics run the other way and it's like 15% or 20%, then for a man to put up his hand and say, I was sexually abused and this is affecting how I'm performing my job, you've become a very small part of a very tiny minority and you feel you've got no ability to have a conversational support. But the numbers are so much greater than that, that if we would have honest conversations, then there would be, overwhelming support for people to be able to get whole. And that really has to be the aim. And unfortunately, any military or even police institution, they just want to get boots back on the ground and out the door and into the battlefield. There's not this sense of you can do that still, but it may take a little longer because we've got to unpack some crap that's driving that in order to get there.
Yeah. And that's so sad as well, that like the people who, like if they wanted the most effective force in whatever sense, they'd want them to be as mentally, how did you put it, mentally whole as possible.
Yeah, mentally whole. And yeah, exactly. And aware. One of the misnomers with PTSD, there's a term called going postal. I'm not sure if you're aware of it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Postal. So
do you want to explain that for people that from the UK that don't? I've heard someone use it before.
There was a case of a postal worker who got pissed off at work, a little bit like I Don't Like Mondays, the song by so what's his name. And so they go into a post office and this guy starts killing people, and it became a cultural term, got to go postal. And my favorite T-shirt is PTSD does not equal postal. And because it gets a lot of response and reactions, and people think that someone with PTSD wants to lose their shit. They want everything to fall apart. And it's exactly the opposite.
Or that they're going to.
Yeah.
People have treated John like a sort of ticking time bomb, because they know about his PTSD diagnosis.
And it's exactly the opposite, because people who are aware of PTSD, they're aware that they're prone to get, and the term's become a horrible cultural thing now, triggered. It seems to have lost its meaning, that they're aware that there are things that could trigger them in the environment and they actually want to stay in control. And so it's exactly the opposite. People who have PTSD want more control over their life because most days they feel they're out of control. And, they're more likely to put themselves in danger or to take longer or to be longer in asking for help in a live fire situation, because they want to prove to everyone else that they can make it happen, that they're normal. And that drives another cycle of risky behaviour. That's a big part of PTSD, constantly having to prove and put yourself out in front. And that cycle itself is dangerous, particularly in a military or a police situation.
Yeah, definitely. So Like, what are the, you've mentioned like a couple of like misunderstandings people have about PTSD. Like, what would you say are the biggest like misconceptions that people have about it? Like like from my perspective, like it's, and you'll definitely correct me on this, but like from from my perspective, it's like, okay, someone goes through some sort of trauma, either as you mentioned, like in childhood or like something, yeah, in adulthood, and then sometime down the line, they're, I don't know, sort of getting, well, yeah, to use the wrong word, but triggered by like, I don't know, things that give them like flashbacks or reminders of the
They're the
event.
right words. They're just misused, but they are the right words. So PTSD isn't just a military thing. PTSD can happen to anyone. There is not a one-size-fits-all recovery program for people with PTSD. The bottom line of it is that you've got to take personal responsibility. And everyone has had a traumatic situation. I've got some men. I've got one friend in particular. He's an Army Special Forces Green Beret, been the tip of the spear for the last however many decades of engagements. Zero PTSD whatsoever. He doesn't have it. He hasn't got a diagnosis. Nothing. And because he just processes, he's able to process memories and events differently. And it really isn't occupationally based. It's experiential and personally based. Is how is your brain able to reconcile these things that are happening? And a lot of it's to do with culture, ethics, moral, spirituality, belief structures as to why you're engaged in a particular activity. And a lot of that is built on how you're reared as a child. So you can see this is a series of building blocks. And if you get up here and you don't have a substructure to support that, then the whole thing collapses.
So you use the word like personal responsibility, like you've got to take personal responsibility. And that is not a term that is thrown around when it comes to conversations about mental health that often. That is, I've seen that there's a lot of sort of talk in the personal responsibility space, but that rarely sort of crosses over into dealing with mental health issues, because the understanding or the general narrative would be, it's not your fault that you have this problem, and therefore you shouldn't need to take responsibility because it's like, yeah, it's not your fault, basically. So why do you use that term?
Not your fault. You were a victim. I know I signed up for the military, but I didn't know the impact it was going to have on me if I killed someone. It's like, dude, you signed up for the bloody military.
I think you have to separate to the trauma from the result of the trauma. So the trauma was not your fault. Absolutely. Childhood abuse, you're in a war situation, and
you're asked to do things that are just abhorrent.
Yeah, something horrific happens. And so trauma is not your fault. But because there is no one-size-fits-all recovery program for PTSD, you have to take responsibility for your own self getting better. You have to be an advocate. You have to communicate. Here are the things that I think I need. I really think that the recovery process, you have to take charge of that. And
And what Mel's, the key of what Mel's saying is that there's a whole group of people in the mental health victim space that are in the victim space, not in the mental health space. They don't want to get healthy mentally. They want to extrapolate the benefits, the government, the social sympathy from being a victim. Their whole identity is tied up with this trauma event, as opposed to tied up with wanting to be a better contributor to society, enjoying a better life, having a fantastic relationship. So there's only one person that can be responsible for that recovery, and that's you.
Yeah. And so when folks are ready to step out of that victim identity, say, I'm ready to get out of this toilet swirl, I want to get better, I want to move forward, then people like us who do recovery coaching, we're actually able to help them. Once they're ready to move forward, because that means they're ready to take responsibility And even if it's just one new thing that I can learn today to begin my recovery journey, then I'm here to help you. I can help you now because you're ready.
And saying, I'm responsible for getting better. I have the ability and I can find the tools to get better. I can. Then I'm not dependent upon anybody else in my journey. I'm dependent on accessing people as tools, books, relationships. I'm now in charge of getting those things with an ability to do it. It puts me in the driver's seat, whereas you flip it, up to this particular point, you've probably been a victim in your own head and in the words of other people. So, I was sexually abused from 4 to 16 by my mother and her friends. Okay, what my life with PTSD was a result of not what I did, but what was done to me. Okay, so that leads everything from the point of realizing what had happened and recalling that. I'm responsible for this beautiful thing that I'm crafting. And I need to take responsibility for that. And I need to be fruitful and make this work. I can't do anything about that. But that made me who I am today. So I've got to embrace that. And now I've got to work towards wholeness. And it's in the same in any aspect of trauma. There has to be that delineation between, and I hate the word victim, but I don't know what else to say it in our English. It's like, I was a victim of these things that happened to me, but I am not going to be a victim of the result of those things that happened to me. I'm going to take control of this, control, flow with, work with, discover, uncover the things that are going to make me a more connected, prosperous, productive human being in and for my world.
One of the things John just said, discover, I think it's really important for people to understand about PTSD because there is a physiological change in the brain. You may be an entirely new person who doesn't very much resemble the person you were before. So there could be some things that you were really good at before. Say you're a type A, driven, very organized person, and now all of a sudden a switch has flipped and you're now like an artistic person who wants to sit around and like
smoke cigars and write poetry. And so like the 2.0 person does not resemble 1.0. And so there's this uncovering process that happens in recovery where you're like, okay, well, who am I now? And what am I good at? And what do I like to do? And what sort of things can my brain produce now that maybe I couldn't produce before? And, on the other side of that is what sort of things am I not good at now that maybe I was good at before? Yeah. And she's talking about a part of when I talk in the book Deal With It, where we discuss this movement from 1.0 to John 2.0. And that was a very clear line, left brain to right brain, driven to not passive, but really just totally different passions and that challenge of reconciling those two probably took 10, 15 years. So it's a long process if the trauma is big enough. And you don't realize it or remember it or recall it till very late in life.
That's got to be so strange to have this like sense of like yourself as such, and then to have the underlying like psychological and even physical elements that made you that person not there anymore, to the point where that underlying like self is no longer there, but like your vision of that self is still there.
Yes. And that's what
it's complicated for me to explain, let alone to deal with.
Thinking, this is who I am, but now you're over here and you think, I don't like that stuff. Or I'm not good at that stuff anymore. I'm good at these things. But then this guy's saying, well, you can't be good at those things. You've never been good at those things. But I am good at those things. You don't even like those things. They're the only things I like now. What the hell do I do with all this stuff? And it's a long, very interesting, tedious, and difficult conversation to have with yourself. And it costs you. It cost me my first marriage. It cost me relationships with my kids. Cost me a business. Cost me a career. Because this is reconciling. Not real. It's the accepting of John 2.0. accepting that John 2.0 was okay, that he wasn't a failure, that he had incredibly different, unique skills that John 1.0 never had, and that the willingness to start at 45 as opposed to starting at, whenever, like zero.
Thinking of like as a person, just as a typical person who doesn't undergo any trauma, like how long does it take us to get comfortable in our skin? Like probably till our 40s, really, we figure out who we are and we kind of like, on the track of like really being comfortable with ourselves. And like he had to start over at 45.
And these are the sorts of things that feed into veteran suicide, feed into suicide amongst police and medical staff, because there's been this change. You were this person, but you can't do that or be that person anymore. It's like, well, then who the hell am I and what good am I? All this skill set doesn't bring me any joy or value, and some of this skill set I can't even do anymore. So who am I? And I'm 45, 55. And this confusion, is this as good as it gets? And how do I rebuild? And what do I do for a career? And how do I make money and feed my family? And my wife doesn't like 2.0, and I can't make myself be 1.0. And this is it's a cluster, man, I'm telling you.
It's an identity crisis of epic proportions, I would say.
She lived through it.
That's quite a midlife crisis.
Oh, yeah. And you feel like you're five, but because everything is new and different, and you don't have words to explain it, and you've got no one to guide you. There's no models to look up to. There's very few people who have been there and done that you can connect to, because don't forget, you're 45 or 50 and supposed to have your shit together and your answers lined out by now. So putting your hand up and saying, I'm having trouble turning up at appointments on time. It's not that I don't want to, it's just that I don't want to. But you've always been 10 minutes early. Yeah, I know, but I was thinking. Okay.
I was thinking. I was just having a think.
I was having a think, and I forgot to get out of the car or put my pants on or something,
Yeah, that would be so strange. Like to have that change. Like my friends are used to like when I lived with them, they used to be like, okay, right, we're going somewhere, and they'd send me upstairs to my room, and then they'd come and find me 20 minutes later playing the guitar, not ready to go. But that was expected. That's normal. But if that was like a completely new trait, it would be like, what the fuck's going on?
What if you were the guy that was on time and out the door? It's like, dude, what are you doing? You're stressing us out here,
Yeah.
And it's a little bit like that, and that's why a lot of people have challenge, coming out of the police force or coming out of the military or doctors, because our identity, particularly as men, our identity is tied up so much in what we do. And when we can no longer do those things, now this will sound horrible, but people will get it. If I'd had cancer, or if I'd had my legs amputated, it would have been easier for me. And I probably would have still, survived with my children and all that, because they could look and go, oh, look, he's got a disability. Look at that disability. He's in cancer. He's got a sickness. But because you look like this and sound like this, and people can't see it, and people don't like, that's where prejudgment comes from, prejudice. They don't like what they can't see or understand. They look and they draw a range of conclusions. And then when you're unable to meet those conclusions or expectations, particularly based on past performance, then you get canned. And they can't come to terms with that. So on the other side is the person who now is walking around with these invisible things, trying to find language for that. It's like speaking only English and ending up in Beijing and try to communicate, where's the bathroom, bro? I've got no understand what that sign is. And you just try and get louder and louder, because when you're speaking to someone of a different ethnicity, we all know that speaking loud and slow is how you communicate. So with PTSD, you end up speaking loud and slow to try and communicate, and people think you're going to go postal. So it's just a cycle of plus fuckery.
Oh. Is that your own term that you've coined?
Plus fuckery? Yeah, it is. Yeah, It's a derivative.
Yeah.
Not safe for children.
I think too, because you look around and you don't see a lot of models for people who've started in the middle of their life and had to rebuild. I think really early on in John's recovery journey, he started putting stuff out there online. So he said, at least somebody can watch me try this.
Fail tragically or succeed sometimes.
That's how we got started, really just connecting with people and helping people who are in the process of recovery.
Yeah. Because there was nothing, this is 15 years ago, there was nothing written, very little written on the impact of sexual childhood abuse. CPTSD had just become a term that had been acceptable alongside PTSD. There was particularly nothing written about the sexual abuse of boys, particularly, again, by female figures in their life. So you've got an absolute lack of information, and you pick up any of the books that were written, and it's like all men are bastards and pricks, and it's like, I don't want to read that crap, I feel bad about myself anyway. And so there's no resources. So I ended up going back to the French Napoleonic War, and that was the startment and the talking about something called Soldier's Heart or Soldier's Tremors. The Civil War had a series of documents on it. And I realized that what the traits of the doctors in those two wars were talking about was ended up being called something called post-traumatic stress disorder. Then I started to unpack a lot of what the military was starting to do. And we started to craft this conversation and understand that what we were dealing with, this was the issue.
It was very early days, and I remember John drawing a bunch of bubbles on a piece of paper, and it was like depression, anxiety, and it was all the things he was dealing with. And he said, if I can't find anything on complex post-traumatic stress disorder, at least I can work on one bubble at a time. And so he would go and he would do some reading about depression and what are some coping mechanisms. And then he would go look at anxiety. And
we made a Venn diagram. We put the most common in there, and we came up with the 20-80 rule. If I can work on 20% that'll affect 80%, then I've got the opportunity to improve the quality of my life and the life of everyone I'm connected to. So that's really how we started our journey.
Like, how did you go about the journey of like figuring yourself out again? Like, where did that begin? Like, where does one begin upon that path?
Okay, so there was a couple of things that were. I won't bore you with too much detail.
Don't worry about that.
We can edit.
Have a toilet read, brother. Sit down and have a toilet. A Designing Men chapters, all of about 2 or 3 minutes long. Lose yourself in the.
Well, that's ideal. Yeah, I've got a Stoicism book in the bathroom at the minute, which is the same sort of deal.
Yeah, get rid of Stoicism. I am this. So first of all, it was redefining normal. And my pressure was, man, I've got to be normal because normal people do this, and this. This is how normal people react. And it was the stress of being normal was just freaking me out, because the more I would try to be normal, the more I realized I wasn't normal. So I redefined normal for myself. One of the things I would do is I'd set my alarm every 90 minutes to go off, so I'd wake up, because if I didn't, then I'd have deep recall nightmares, and this went on for 5 or 6 years of being in orgies and a range of other things. And once I got in those nightmares, I couldn't get out of them for days. It was just this cycle. So I woke myself up. I never slept past 3 o'clock because that's when the worst ones happen. So I'd wake myself up at 3 o'clock and I'd go to the gym. So for me, the reason I'm going to the gym is because I'm crazy. Okay. So then I'd be really tired in the afternoon and I'd have to have a nap. So the reason I was having a nap was because I'm crazy. So I redefine my normal. No, I go to the gym because I enjoy going to the gym, because the gym makes me healthy and the gym gives me a good mental attitude and the gym helps me cope with the end of the day. That's what my normal is. I have a nap in the afternoon because I get up at 3 a.m. in the morning and I go to the gym because I like going to the gym, because that helps. And you see what I mean? So I redefine that normal. And I think that was probably the biggest thing. And the other one was just accepting that I would never be John 1.0 again, and going and having an honest conversation with myself that there was things about John 2.0 that I really actually enjoyed. And And I was doing very well at some of those things, but I couldn't let myself celebrate doing well at it because that's not what John 1.0 did. So redefining normal, accepting John 2.0. Is there anything else you'd think about?
Could you give an example of one of those things that like John 2.0 is good at, that like John 1.0 sort of like wouldn't quite like get his head around?
Writing. I love to write. I've written 13 books.
Whoa.
2 poetry books. I'm just finishing my first fictional series. That's 3 volumes already, and we're going to publish all 3 of those. It's a crime fiction based on my life, and we've worked on a whole lot of very high-level trafficking cases, like the Epstein cases and the Peter Nygaard cases. So it's all that sort of, fact for fiction type thing. And
I would say John 1.0 definitely knew how to string some sentences together. He published a lot of books as that guy, but they were all nonfiction, kind of self-help, coaching, stuff like that. And so now John 2.0 is a storyteller. He's a poet. He's much more of an entertainer, I think, with the writing. And I think just giving yourself permission to kind of make that transition. And like when I was making him some business cards one day, this was early on before we were married. We worked together for a long time before we got married. And I made him some business cards and I put author and poet on there, and along with, the other business things he was doing at the time. And he was like, "Do you think I'm an author?" Yes, I do. So.
One of the other turning points in life was in Ireland at the Writers' Museum. And we went into the Writers' Museum, and here I am. I'm struggling to work to create. So I went from being always employed to having now to be self-employed, because I was now experiencing challenges, going out in public, being caught in an elevator, being caught on peak hour traffic, and I just have to get out of my car and walk down a freeway because I was going to totally freak out. So I got some major job things we had to work through, which makes you feel really challenged at 45 and 50 to totally reinvent and come up with a different career. But my passion was writing. And I felt, well, if you, the whole self-motivation, follow your passion and it'll fund you. Dude, there's no way that was going to fund me. It just wasn't going to happen.
We were going to starve.
We were going to starve to death. And I was in the Writers' Museum in Ireland. And I read all these famous guys, the great Irish poets and authors, and they all had second jobs. They were teachers. They were a range of different things. And I remember thinking, it's okay. I can do this one thing that can fund this thing, because this thing isn't who I am. This is who I am. And it's okay to do that. And so that gave me a purpose to try, a reason to find a way to fund it. And the funding gave me a reason to try and discover who I was and what my potential could be in this space.
It was okay to have a day job. Like, he walked out of the Writers' Museum knowing that it was okay to have a day job. There was one guy who was a stonemason,
Yeah.
And
he's one of Ireland's great poets. I can't remember the guy's name. But the challenge in all of this is not getting tied up in regret, because you wish that you had this happen to you when you were 20 or 30, because then by the time in 50 and 60, you'd be in a totally different career space. But here you are now at 50 with only 15 years under your career belt, and you've got to try and manage and think about, well, what do I do and how do I go about doing it?
Was the poet Robinson Jeffers or James O'Hearn by any chance?
James O'Hearn.
There you go. I want to know who it was.
And there was another one. There's another guy who was a school teacher. He was another famous one, and I can't remember some of the names of the I should know them. I've got books.
That was a life-changing trip, though.
Absolutely
Our trip to
life-changing
Ireland. Yes.
Oh yeah. Oh, you're making me nostalgic for home. I'm not.
Flew to Dublin, then we turned left, and that was it. That was the only rule. We had one night there in a bed and breakfast, and then our rule was, this has nothing to do with your podcast, sorry. But this is this creative cigar-smoking poet guy just rambling.
This is good. I like this.
But you're Irish, you get it. So our rule was whoever we spoke to that day, if they told us something to do the next day, that's what we did. So that was it.
We just talked to local people and...
Dude, we ended up in the most obscure places having the best cups of teas and scones that you could ever. On some bloody island with sheep and a trolley cart going across, mate. And then we're up in some foothills where we nearly got bloody killed by the GPS because it was a bloody sheep track having vodka and gin in this brand new distillery in the back of nowhere. It was just bloody brilliant.
Oh, that's my homeland.
Yeah, it was just fantastic. It was just nice, mate, just wandering around, you know.
No, I miss the air. That's the thing. I'm living in London now. I moved here like 5 months ago. It's great and everything, but I miss the air. I can't wait to return home and just step off the plane and just like drink it in.
I know we want to go back again. We'd love to go back again.
I don't know what it is that makes it. It's like you could smell the rain.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Man, and it was summer over there. They had this big heat wave. It was a couple of years ago. Mate, everyone had pulled their recliners out of their lounge rooms, and they're all sitting on the front, you know, with their hankies on their head and their white singlets. And it was the funniest thing I'd ever seen. It was just brilliant. You need 2 up and 2 down. It was just brilliant.
Oh yeah, we don't see the sun very often. It's a very Irish thing to when it's there. We're like, oh my dear goodness, we have to be outside right now in the sun.
They all had holidays.
We might not see it again for months. Like you have to take advantage of it immediately. So I was wondering if we could go back just like a little bit here, because we've talked about the actual physiological change that happens in the brain with PTSD. Like I was wondering if you could like explain a little bit more like what's actually happening in the brain there.
So it's the way that the brain processes memories, and so when, especially with things like repressed memories, things happen, and the brain wants to do a couple of things based upon childhood experience and education and environment. Your brain wants to put this experience and file it somewhere. So if you think of your brain as a filing cabinet with all these life events, and your brain is looking at, in my case, you know, being anally raped with a toy soldier because I didn't clear up my room. Okay, my brain's going, dude, I've got nowhere to place this. Like, what the hell where do I file this thing? You know, it's like, so it just sits in a whole bunch of piles, like a pile of paper on your desk. So this trauma is not being able to be cataloged like great Christmas events and things that happen, et cetera, et cetera. So you've got no way to deal with it. So, and that's when recall happens, is it's like opening the window on your soul and your brain goes, just deal with it. I've got to clean up this desk, and all this stuff just blows up. And that's when this recall happens, and you end up trying to grab these memories and trying to do something with them, and you don't know what to do with it. So when the brain is suppressing memories, it's actually keeping them in a file of unprocessed memories or things we don't know what to do with. Then when recall happens, or an event or a trigger happens, you end up realizing that you've just been walking around with these bunch of papers, and now you have to do something with this. What do I do with this that happened? What do I do with the death of this person? What do I do with this thing that was done to me as a kid? And you've got to now deal with this. And that's when it gets difficult, because you can't ever put that back down again, because now it's alive, and you go, okay, I've got to deal. Well, how the hell do I deal with that? You know, and it'll be the strangest things. I remember once when we were engaged, we walked into a candle shop, you know, one of those foo-foo places that sell, you know, New Age crystals and candles and shit. So we walked in there and we did that, and the smell of a particular scent of candle brought back a sexual event I was involved with as a child. Now, I would never have planned that. I would never have known that. But when it came back, it was so visceral. So I'm standing there and I was totally locked up, and I just had to leave the store, because now I have this event, this memory, this thing that I've now got to deal with. So that's what a real triggering event looks like, because now you're walking around and all you can see is this piece of paper.
And John when that happened, he didn't go postal. Like, I think probably someone who didn't know him would never have known that he was triggered. But I saw him quickly leave the store, so I followed him out, and then he was trying to tell me what happened, and he started to stutter. And so I knew immediately that he was extremely overwhelmed. If he starts to stutter, I know, and so we just found a bench to sit on, and I held his hand, and it takes, when he would have a recall like that, it would take him days or weeks to sort of take that memory and file it. What do I do with this? And so, we would have a lot of conversation around it.
And that's one thing that people don't quite understand with PTSD. This is part of some of the things that I ended up with my first marriage going bankrupt emotionally, was that it's not that you're so self-consumed that all you want to do is talk about it, but you just want to talk about it because you want to solve this bloody thing. And you need to put this somewhere. And what the hell do I do with an orgy when I'm 5 or 6? Like, what the hell do I do with? Why would people do that? And why would they allow that to happen? And all these other things start to come up. And it's like, where do I file this?
And John is a verbal processor, so he does need to have a lot of conversations. Now, I would imagine with someone else who maybe is not a verbal processor, maybe they, draw or, do art, or I'm not sure how they would process through something like that. But John definitely needs to have those conversations.
So if you think of it, that's one incident and there's 2 or 3 weeks of trying to work this out. Now, if someone doesn't want to come with you on that journey, that's the death of any relationship. Or if someone's so absorbed that they really don't want to deal with it, they just want to highlight how bad their life is, then that's the death of that relationship. So I forget the question. I think that's answering it.
So we work with couples a lot, I will say, when we're doing recovery coaching, because if you have someone in your circle who's willing to walk with you and process out these things, then we definitely want to help, both people.
Because that support is key.
Yeah, I can imagine.
Yeah, it is.
Especially if you're someone that needs to talk through it. And it feels like something you'd have to talk to. It feels like things like that you'd almost need the validation of another human to acknowledge it.
Yeah.
And acknowledge that it happened and that it wasn't right or wasn't a nice thing to happen. And for example, if I walked out of that shop and not coping, and Mel was selfish and self-consumed, and all of a sudden it was like, but this is my shop and my favorite, and I wanted to be, and what the hell are you doing? You're just trying to ruin my day, and blah, blah, blah. And all of a sudden you're going to, I'm not going to talk to you about this. And or if you do try and talk about it, they go, oh, well, there you go, just talking about that thing that happened to you as a kid. Why can't you just get over this? And nothing's going to work, Yeah. You're either going to stay in the store because you don't want to have an argument, or you're going to go, fuck you, I'm going, and you move on.
Yeah. So like the triggers could theoretically be anything almost then. Like you said, it was just like a smell of a candle.
Random, brother. Yeah. I got a mate of mine who was, 30 years in blood and sand, and was driving past a building site, and nail guns were going boom, 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 boom. And it reminded him of something that happened in Afghanistan. So it's just different for different people and different things. And I might go into a candle shop now and probably nothing's going to happen. And it's not just candle shops in general. It was the combination of whatever my brain was trying to process, that particular environment, my brain's willingness and vulnerability or saying it's time to deal with a new one of these things instead of just putting it away. So there's all this little combination of things that make a perfect storm that you really need to have your tools in your toolbox ready to deal with when it happens.
So like you talked earlier about like there's people who can go through the most like horrific events and just sort of like they process it in like, I don't want to say the right way, but like a way in which that allows them to like deal with it essentially. Like what's the difference between what they're doing and like how people who then go on to experience PTSD are doing? Like what's the difference?
In military or at law enforcement environments, a lot of it has to do with their moral construct, their spiritual values, and their sense of community and wholeness. If I'm going to war for a righteous cause, if I've had a sense of upbringing that right is right and wrong is wrong, we're going on behalf of our country in the free world to address an issue which is wrong, then you've got the weight of a nation, the weight of your family, and the weight of your core values behind you. Okay, so that's one. If you find yourself in a situation where that's not the case, that's why there's been very extreme, that's why Vietnam vets have a whole lot more trouble coping with what their war experience was and say World War I, World War II people were, because one came back to ridicule and disdain, the other came back to celebration and glory. So in another space, say it's the childhood abuse thing, it's like there's no way that is ever acceptable. So there's no way any reasonable human being believes that having sex with a child is an acceptable thing. So there's nothing to put that in a file. There's no way to understand it. Then that leads into rage, acceptance, the treatment, feeling of it's not fair. What do I do with this? I want revenge. And then you've got to take all those things and you've got to sort all those things through. And so, again, it's about a series of constructs that you've got or matrices that you build to cope with those things. And that's a challenge, because in the midst of trying to unpack this and work through it, you're trying to establish your own matrix or construct to give it value, meaning, and a form that you can come to terms with it. And that's where it becomes really challenging, because you're trying to unpack it and you're trying to build a place of acceptance for it.
One particular young lady we were working with right now just had recall of an event when she was very young. And I think probably the difference in her case than John's, first of all, John's trauma was sustained, but also at the point when she's having recall, she's in a happy marriage with someone that she loves, and she has this sort of support network around her. So when she did have her recall, I think she's less likely to have PTSD, even though something happened to her that is, abhorrent, and her brain would not know how to file it. But because she has this support network around her of folks who know what to do and how to handle it, she can work through and she can process it. Like her brain can, okay, this happened to me. It wasn't the right thing, and here are the steps we're taking. And so I think that she is less likely to develop PTSD from her experience.
Yeah. And she's also been able to go to the police and have a conversation about the person who interfered with her. So there's a sense of closure for her. And for a lot of us, particularly guys my age, and guys, she had recall of it in her mid-20s. Most men have recall of stuff that happened to them around 40. It's a massive difference. And so by the time you're in 40, it's a totally different social construct around you that allows you to have these conversations. Male, 40, in the middle of a career, 20, newly married female. They're two total different worlds and societal levels of acceptance.
Why is that? Is there like a reason that, or could you speculate wildly?
I probably could. I think because as a man, you're so driven to perform, so driven to get a career established, you just get about doing it. And it's like and you just block it, and you're so focused on whatever this is. And by the time you get around 40, you realize that most of that was bullshit anyway. And you're starting to relax and starting to ask yourself some bigger questions about why have I spent the last 40 years of my life doing those things? And that gives your brain time to slow down and go, okay, what are we going to, let's have a conversation. That's about the only, it's how we manage to suppress memories for so long is really just the brain's inability to process it. And so there are guys that deal with it earlier because they remember it earlier, and there may be an environment where things come up and they have a conversation and all of a sudden they come down a path. But in my case, that wasn't the case. My case, it was daffodils. Because when I was a kid, there was a neighbor who lived next door who planted daffodils. And every springtime, daffodils would come up. And I counted my years by daffodils. And if I saw daffodils as I walked to school, I knew that I'd survive one more year. And I was 45, and I walked out of my shed where I was writing, doing some prep, and I saw daffodils. And I remember thinking, aren't they beautiful? And then everything like that came back. Just all the recall of what happened to me as a kid came back in a moment, and didn't stop for probably 7 years. Total cluster, mate. I'm a total cluster. Totally fucked everything up.
It's crazy. I can't even like get my head around.
My wife at the time found me curled in a fetal position, sobbing. What was it? I can't remember. They raped me. Or they abused. Look what they did to me. Look what they did to me. And I went from traveling the world, 200,000 air miles a year or something, speaking in massive organizations, to a chronic stutter, a fear of flying, couldn't be in crowds, couldn't leave the home, unemployable, and lost everything.
Whoa.
Just in a moment. And when they filmed the documentary in 2015, so that was 6 or 7 years later, I just newly divorced, living in a 1-bedroom apartment, and I had cinder blocks for a bed and a mattress on it. And that was it. That was life. Life had gone from making, $500,000 a year, traveling the world, blowing and going, doing everything I thought I was supposed to do, to nothing. Lost it all.
Well, I think it's credit to you that you've managed to rebuild yourself from that point. So, like, the last question I wanted to ask, and maybe this isn't even a great question, and we don't have that much time, but do you think that anyone can ever be considered like cured, quote unquote, from PTSD, or is it just something that's always going to be there?
You have to, and I think the worst thing you can do is put the pressure on yourself to find a miracle. If you've got to accept yourself. And if you can accept yourself and accept that every day I can spend a day and find one tool to put in my toolbox to help me get better, then you will get better. There's a couple of things that are very important. Diet is very important. Like red food coloring, orange food coloring number 5 leads to anxiety and depression. I nearly committed suicide over a Snickers bar and some Cheetos, believe it or not. Real true story. Talk about it. Sugar leads to anxiety and depression. So exercise increases endorphins, GABA, all that sort of good stuff. Be aware of, if I found myself really depressed, I'd look at what my diet was for the last 24 hours, and I would know I was depressed because of the music I listened to and the color of my workout T-shirt. I'd go, dude, okay, you okay? Yeah, I'm okay. I just want to wear, Johnny Cash T-shirt. Fuck yeah. I just want to wear a Johnny Cash T-shirt. That's okay. Okay, good. I'll wear a Johnny Cash T-shirt. But all of a sudden I go, no, maybe I'm not. Maybe I need to change this, And I think these are all important things that I've found for me that works for me. And that's what we try and do when we do recovery coaching, is talk to people about, it's not, most therapists, mate, they've never been through what you've been through. Now, they're really good, but if you can find a therapist who's been to war on the front line, they can talk to you about it. If you found a therapist who's been sexually abused, they can probably help you. But most of them haven't been. So they're good people with a good heart, but they've got no fucking clue. And the difference between therapy and coaching is understanding, what do I have to do in order to take hold of my life and get it somewhere else, get it to where I want it to go. And as you pointed out, when you have this 1.0 to 2.0, you don't really know where you want to go. And that's when it becomes it's just a real challenge to try and work through that stuff. And I think as far as being a writer, I came to accept that probably 6 months ago.
Wow.
So in our recovery coaching, we talk more in terms of management than being cured, and how well are you managing yourself, and what tools are you going to go after?
And we've developed some protocol that have kept people in remission for about 6 to 9 months. So we've developed this with a bunch of doctors and different things. So when I say managing it, it's just that I never want to drop my guard so that I just go and eat a bunch of candy because I can, because I'm cured, because it's going to affect me in 2 or 3 days' time, put me in depression, in a cycle that'll take me probably 2 weeks to get out of. And I think having to be vigilant, and that's part of where we started the conversation, is personal responsibility. I don't eat candy, not because I don't like a Butterfinger or a Snickers or make Milo. I love Milo. Like Milo, God created Milo. And violet crumble, I miss a violet crumble, brother. I'm telling you, I love it. There's one little store up the road that sells pommy food, violet crumbles. Oh, mate, oh, crunchy. Oh, focus. Yeah, sorry. So, but the thing with the personal responsibility is you've got to drag that through and take that thing. And you've got to be prepared to do it, because this is my mental health that I'm talking about, and it impacts the one that I love. So that gives me extra onus on making sure that I do it well.
Well, that is a beautiful note on which to end things. John, Melissa, it's been, a pleasure, quite a ride. So I really want to thank you for your time. Is there...
Thanks for having us.
Cheers, mate. Appreciate it.
No problem. Like, is there anything like specifically you want to point people towards? Like, I mean, I'll be linking your website and
Sure.
like the interviews that you'd sent me, but like, is there anything else you want to point people towards?
Mate, I just wanted to give them that code so people that follow you can get something to help them.
Yes.
That's all.
Yes. So if people can use the code GIST50 at the checkout to get 50% off the book, which
the ebook, yeah.
Yeah. So I will put the link for that in the description below for people. Thanks a lot, man. It's been a pleasure. Thanks, Melissa.
Mate, nice meeting you. Hope you have fun in London.
I will. I am. Thanks for making it all the way to the end of the video. Don't forget to like, share, subscribe, and leave a comment for us in the comments below. Let me know what you thought and if you'd like to see more of this from the show. Thank you, and we'll see you again next time.